The future. The truly great prophets may often display psychic and healing abilities. As we come to the end of the 20th century, an American prophet named Paul Solomon may be considered one of history's most gifted seers. Edgar Cayce, one of America's most gifted prophets, passed away in 1946. But Cayce's legacy would not end with his death. In the late 1930s, a child born to a Southern Baptist family would become known to the world as the second Edgar Cayce. His name was Paul Solomon, and his warnings to the world would echo those of the sleeping prophet a generation before him.
Thoughts of fear, thoughts of worry and disharmony will destroy mind, body, spirit, science, technology, environment, the planet itself.
Paul Solomon was a teacher, a healer, a priest in the true sense of connection with God, a miracle worker, a loving, caring man who believed that everybody could learn to develop their full potential.
People started to talk of Paul as the second Edgar Cayce. And Paul's response to that was, hey, I don't want to be the second Edgar Cayce. I want to be the first Paul Solomon.
Born William Bilo Dove to a Baptist minister's family in the South, the boy who would grow up to be a prophet was a solitary child. He was said to have supernatural abilities that troubled his religious parents, as his wife Sharon recalls.
When Paul was a child, he used to see lights around people.
Afternoon, preacher. Ma'am.
Good afternoon to you, Mr. Harkins.
Paul, what do you say?
Good afternoon, Mr. Harkins, sir.
He saw dark, dull, ugly lights as bad people.
He's got a bad light. That's a bad person.
Enough of this evil talk, young man. Show respect for your elders.
Often, people who his parents thought were very nice and loving would then end up cruel or mean. They didn't know how to deal with that strange child. He learned very early not to say those kinds of things because it had such a reaction. It was very difficult for Paul as a child seeing and feeling these things.
When young Paul saw beautiful white lights around people, he knew them to be genuinely good. One such person was his best childhood friend, Jada.
Jada was a little black boy, and in the South in the early 1940s, white children didn't play with black children. Paul distinguished between the beautiful lights and the ugly lights, but he had no conscious recognition that there was a difference between black children and white children. A black child to him with beautiful lights was a beautiful child. And he made friends with this little boy, and the people in the town sort of frowned on their being together.
But one day, after a short illness, Jada suddenly died. Now alone, Paul left the funeral to mourn his best friend.
Jada, you're back! They said you died.
Yeah, I changed bodies. Come on, let's go play.
And they played with each other. And the way Paul describes this, they played with each other as if he was a physical being.
Over the next 7 years, the spirit child Jada taught Paul many things, including an amazing psychic ability that would help him with his schoolwork.
Paul was not very fond of studying, and he was discussing this with his friend Jada one day. Jada told him that if he placed books on his stomach, he would be able to absorb the material. So Paul went through school learning by placing the books on his solar plexus, whereas all the other children had to study. One day when he was showing off, he read a note that one of his kids had written to another kid.
Hold on, you think Steve is cute? Hey, Betsy wrote a note. She's goo-goo eyes over Steve.
Give me that. Paul must have X-ray eyes. Listen to this. Steve is the cutest boy in the whole wide world.
The little girl who had written the note became very upset and went and told the principal that Paul had somehow taken the note and communicated it.
Hello? Yes, Principal Moore. He what?
When the school principal phoned Paul's parents about the incident, they too became upset.
Principal says you're scaring the other kids with your nonsense and...
We don't understand what you're doing, but if it is not of God, then it's of the devil.
And this scared Paul terribly, and he started shutting off his psychic gift.
Convinced by his parents that his powers were of the devil, Paul reasoned that Jada too must be something evil.
Stay out of my life. I don't want you to come back anymore.
As a young man, Paul studied to be a Baptist minister in the honored traditions of his family.
He had gotten his first church and planned to spend his life preaching in the Baptist faith, but his wife one day announced that she was leaving him, and there's no such thing as a divorced Baptist minister. So in an instant, his marriage and his life work ended.
He rebelled, and he did everything that he could think of, from drinking to smoking to drugs to sex. That was what he thought God didn't want him to do.
After 5 years, he realized that he was going nowhere. His life was going nowhere. He thought about going to a psychiatrist, and finally he went to a hypnosis clinic, but it was too expensive, and he became very, very depressed about it. So he went to his favorite little bar and sat down next to his friend Harry, and he was telling him his sad story.
Can't afford a therapist, I can't afford a hypnotist.
Happy days, gentlemen.
I can buy my buddy a drink.
Let me try. I hypnotized somebody before. Yeah.
That's good enough for me. Let's do it.
Paul's adopted son David describes the results of Harry and Paul's experiment.
As Paul recalls it, Harry did this boring hypnosis routine. And Paul lay there thinking, you know, this has got to be the world's worst hypnotist.
You're getting sleepy. Very sleepy. Keep your eye on the watch. You're getting sleepy. Very sleepy. You're going under my spell. You're getting very sleepy. Your eyes are sleepy.
The next thing he remembered, he woke up, clutching his solar plexus in pain.
Why am I on the floor? Did you kick me in the stomach or something?
No, I put you under and you flopped down on the floor. Some spirit started to talk, speaking right through you like you were possessed or something. It was great.
Get out of here.
No.
And he was angry and threw Harry out of the house because all he was feeling was pain. Harry came back the next day and said, Paul, I know that wasn't you because you're not that smart. What was being said there was much more intelligent than I know you are. And that intrigued Paul, so they tried it again.
You're getting sleepy, very sleepy.
This time, Paul remembered going through a long tunnel, and at the end of the tunnel, he saw Jada. He also saw a girl by the name of Merle, who he had dated in high school, who had also died. They were waiting for him at the end of the tunnel, and they comforted him, and they supported him, and in effect held his hand as he explored this other realm of consciousness.
They also asked a question about where his grandfather's money was, because his grandfather had told Paul for years and years and years about this lost money.
Paul, where did Grandpa hide the money?
The money's in a chimney. In a house where nobody lives.
And they went to an old burned-down house, and they found the money and the stocks.
The voice that spoke through Paul called itself the Source.
Very dangerous.
Author Dr. Wayne Wheeler describes the extent of its power.
There seemed to be nothing in the entire manifold of universal creation which the Source didn't know or that it couldn't find an answer to. Able to penetrate deeply into the total intelligence of the universe, it seemed to be a door opening onto infinity.
I remember hearing a story that happened when Paul was first beginning to do readings, when he was in Atlanta, Georgia. Harry had told a policeman about what Paul did. A little girl had been lost for a few days, and the policeman came to Paul's house and asked if Paul could do a reading to help locate her.
Now focus on our little girl.
We see a street.
Do you see a street sign?
Yes. Magnolia.
Do we turn left or right?
Turn right. We see a house. We're inside the house now, listening. Around the corner, we hear her now. She's hiding under the bed.
Paul still doesn't understand how it worked. He just knew that he was able to see these things somehow because there was a need there.
As word spread of Paul's miraculous powers, his reputation as a healer began to grow.
He got so many requests for people doing readings, usually from people who were very desperate, who were in need of physical help. They had health ailments that doctors had not been able to heal, or that they were emotionally distraught, people who were really at the end of their rope and needed support. In 1976, Paul did a reading for a man who had a son who, about a year old, was not able to keep down any food at all and was very emaciated, had to be on intravenous feeding just in order to survive. Doctors had no idea what they could do to help this child absorb nutrition. The reading said that he had an allergy to cow's milk and that if they simply switched to goat's milk, he would be able to keep the milk down and start to absorb nutrition. They did it, and he's a healthy teenager today. There's a woman who had very severe scoliosis. Paul did a reading for her, and the reading suggested that she place a fresh ocean fish on her back and tape it to the back, keep it there overnight, and to sleep that way for a number of nights in a row. As the fish decayed, the enzymes would be absorbed into her bones, and her bones would become more supple. Not a very comfortable thing to do, and certainly not a traditional healing technique, but it worked.
With each reading, Paul became increasingly adept at contacting and communicating with this strange, all-knowing power. According to the people closest to him, strange phenomena, even miracles, were an everyday occurrence.
One day, Paul and another friend of mine and I were driving in a car, and there was an electrical storm going on, and Paul said that anywhere he pointed his finger, you'd see lightning.
That's very funny, Paul.
And I thought, yeah, Paul, you don't need to pull this stuff with me. I saw a bolt of lightning right where he pointed it, and I stopped laughing and I just shut up. I didn't understand how he did it, and he never explained what happened. But strange things like that just happened around him.
Another eerie example of Paul's connection with the source was witnessed by Dr. Bill Beidler.
Paul came to my house for a series of readings. I conducted them in my library. I had a double closet with a sliding door. Paul was laying on the floor in the dim light of the closet. About a third of the way into the reading, I saw floating above Paul, his other body, connected by a cord to the solar plexus. Paul stopped right in the middle of a sentence. The minute I saw this, he stopped. And it took me a few moments to realize that I had interfered with the reading. So I, at that point, withdrew, and he took up right where he had left off without even a break.
If, like Edgar Casey before him, Paul Solomon could see auras, heal from afar, and be associated with strange and miraculous events, would he also, like Casey, be able to describe events from the future? And would those snapshots of a world yet to come echo Casey's often dire prophecies of impending doom and destruction?
The Solomon source has been remarkably accurate in its prophecies. The loss of the giant air base at Subic Bay in the Philippines is just one example among many. The source said that the United States would lose that base in 10 years, and in precisely 10 years, it was lost. The source predicted the end of the Iran-Iraq conflict at a time when most experts were telling us that it was about to increase. It predicted an early end to the 1991 Persian Gulf conflict. The source predicted the downturn of the Japanese economy years before it occurred. The source predicted the resignation of Richard Nixon well over a year before Nixon actually left office. The source predicted many things that have come true and were quite remarkably accurate.
Paul Solomon began a reading by sitting up and praying. He then laid down. His breathing would nearly stop, and then his solar plexus would heave violently in the middle, and it was like shooting a bullet out of his body, out of his solar plexus, actually. And you knew he was in trance.
While deep in this trance, Paul's source would speak through him, revealing even more frightening information about the fate of mankind.
Do we have any information on earthquakes?
Considerable destruction in areas of the west coast of the United States. A quake measuring 8.9 or higher in California is building and is close. And the beginning of the mass exodus from that greatest city there.
Can you tell us about coming changes of the earth?
The continent America will split in half. Down its very center. A wall of water will come rushing across.
He saw in a vision a tremendous tidal wave approaching the South Carolina and Georgia coastline that would inundate everything all the way until Atlanta and the Appalachian Mountains, and that this would occur during the time of the pole shift, around the year 2000.
Changes in temperature make it nearly impossible for the survival of living species or plants. Not much be left recognizable on this ball of earth.
In the words of the source, this earth is about to undergo a complete destruction. A relapse of cosmos into an amorphous state of chaos before this impending birth of a new earth, a new world takes place. And specifically, the source mentions that it's these last 5 years, they're of critical importance.
Armageddon or future wars?
The introduction of nuclear devices is building and is very close. You will see plumes of fire and smoke as spoke of in the book of Revelation.
What we are talking about is a nuclear confrontation in the Middle East that will spread a great deal of radiation and toxic waste over a wide area.
We see children dying in the streets, and you will see destruction as has never occurred on this planet.
Over and over again in the source readings, it stated that we have a very short period of time in which we can change before the dire predictions given by the source come true. And if we don't change, they will come true.
On the morning of March 6th, 1994, Paul passed away in his sleep, very peacefully. Paul had been very ill, and yet he didn't stop. He just ran all over the world, helping people. He just didn't let his illness get in the way of doing the work that he needed to do.
Paul Solomon tapped what he called the source to divine what may be looming cataclysmic upheavals. At the same time, in a far corner of the country, another source was being called upon by someone as innocent can be.